I was telling them how much I admire. One of my favorite movies is The Adjustment Bureau, which you wrote and directed, and then you wrote Ocean's 12. And one of the things that are terrific about this film is that we're dealing with very serious subject, a part of our history we're not aware of, but you frame it with a heist in a good way, in a thriller, and it's fun, entertaining. Is that something, can you tell us about that, about framing this story as a heist?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's extremely serious subject matter, and there's a way to do it that's just a straight drama. But I think it's more accessible if you put the sort of thriller aspects in. And it's good to have a little fun, little Sam Jackson laughter. So yeah, it was obviously intentional, and it helps to have had a past in the Ocean's franchise and stuff to do that. And it also helps the movie get made, right? Because it's a hard story to tell. It's about if you try and tell a financier, hey, I want to make a movie about 2 African American leads in the past, because they don't like to make movies that are in the past usually, and they're doing banking and real estate. You can imagine how that pitch goes. They're sort of like, have anything else? So, but yeah, if you can say, but it's going to be told through this, this kind of magical lens of, it's going to be not just uplifting, but also fun and funny. So that's what I was trying to do. Anyway, I hope it worked for you guys.
Oh, but it did. Actually, people, you missed the big applause, and in several times when I was...
Well, you were vamping.
Was vamping, they were clapping. You mentioned the finances, and I also, told them that anytime I start hearing about finances or banking, my head explodes. And you... in this movie, you make it so palatable, so accessible. Was that something that you were conscious when you were making the movie, that you needed to convey all these numbers and blind us with science, but make it accessible?
Yeah, definitely one of my goals was, all the numbers in the movie are the real numbers. That's exactly what they paid for the packet of loans. It's exactly the amount of money they made as a finder's fee. It's all the stuff that was used against them in the congressional hearing. And I felt it was important to stick to that history. And I also felt like I didn't want to dumb down for the audience what would have been involved for Matt to front for them and learn. So the theory was, Matt is kind of us. Like, you get all this math and you're like, I don't know what you are talking about. Maybe we should start with a math review. It's telling the audience that it's okay to not know, because these guys know. And this character that you're watching learn is like what it would be like if you had to do it. That was the conception.
Which most movies do the opposite, where they dumb it down and you actually, you keep us on the edge.
I mean, that's all the real math. It's not just the real numbers, that's the real math of how you value a building. All the stuff the bank examiner says, that's all real. The way that the bank gets shut down with the Treasury Department and the FDIC, the person who says you're fired versus the person who says we're revoking your license, that's all 100% how it happens.
How did you become involved in the project, and how did you become first time aware of this story?
So Joel Vertel, one of our producers, who's also the editor of the movie, heard the story years ago, 19 years ago, when he was a junior executive at Paramount, and he was like, this is incredible. They really had to dress as janitors and chauffeurs to be inside their own bank. And he pitched it to me, and he pitched it to Anthony Mackie basically at the same time, because we were making Adjustment Bureau together.
Adjustment Bureau, Anthony Mackie is one of the stars of Adjustment Bureau.
Yeah, and Anthony had a great time. We had a great time working together on Adjustment Bureau, so we were like, we gotta find something else to do together or whatever. And Joel pitched this thing, and we sort of looked at each other like, yeah. And it was like, that sounds like an interesting story. So that was 2010 or 2011 when that happened. And then then I was doing other stuff. Anthony was busy becoming Captain America, and so it took some time. And then there was an existing script. I wanted to meet with those writers. There's a bunch of research, like audio tapes of Bernard Jr., like 7-8 hours of audio of Bernard talking about his exploits. There was a congressional testimony. There's a bunch of stuff to read and sort of process, and then figure out, as we discussed, like, how am I going to make this math accessible and what they did accessible? So it took from 2011 until now.
And this whole idea of two black men that bought 177 houses and bought one of the most
177 buildings, which we think they were between 10 and 100 units. So they had thousands and thousands of units in Los Angeles at a time when Los Angeles was like an eighth the population it is now. I mean, they were major landholders and holders of apartments.
I'm just curious, how come this story hadn't been told before, and it's not something that we had been aware of before historically?
I mean, I think you can answer your own question for that. It's if you go look in mainstream publications about the purchase of the Banker Building, there's nothing. There's a reference in like Jet or Ebony magazine to them buying the building, and yet you saw at the end of the movie, Lyndon Johnson as vice president comes and to honor their purchase of it. That's a shot of him with the real Bernard and real Joe and his Secret Service detail behind them. So it was a big enough deal to get onto the desk of the Vice President of the United States, but it didn't get written up anywhere in the white press. Then when they got hauled before Congress, and that was all over the place. You can find that. So I think they were erased from history, and that was part of the impulse to do anything I could to help get it made. Because initially I was just like, hey, I'll help whatever way, whether I direct it or not. I'll do what I can, given where I am in the business, to help it get made. But it turned into this. So.
One of the key moments in the film is when Joe advises Bernard that success will change him. And what is so poignant about that moment is not only does it change him, but he changes so many people's life after what he does. Can you talk
right on that? From a character standpoint and a human standpoint, I think it was something interesting to explore. The way that in Bernard's case, he went from thinking, well, I can just keep my head down and wear glasses and be smart and not really talk about being black and it'll be fine. And then of course he realizes, well, no, not if he goes as far as he does with the banks. He grows a conscience in a way, right? He's keeping his head down, he's ignoring his past. And then at a certain point he says, I can't do that, going back and seeing his father. So that's, I thought, from a character standpoint was interesting. From a more social commentary or real world or timeliness standpoint, I think there hasn't been a story about racial oppression in economics that's a mainstream movie. There's stories about slavery, there's stories about the criminal justice system being stacked against African Americans, but in a way, the root of it all is economic disparity and wealth disparity. And this movie delves into those things, and I think it's important, and we were seeing, once the trailer went out, like a huge response, grassroots kind of response to that notion of like, yeah, go out into the economy and make money and become wealthy and use business to try and change the world if you can.
Which is ultimately the American dream.
It is the American dream.
They went out and beat a corrupt, unfair system,
yeah.
In the way. Can you tell us about Eunice becoming, Bernard's wife, that she becomes an integral part of the story, and can you tell us about her and
yeah, I mean,
the script?
It's there. So in the same way that they got kind of erased from history, the written record, like you're trying to piece things together, and so there is invention that comes into, like, you know, Eunice is not alive, and she was, I guess the producer got her life rights right before she died, but then she died, so now you can't interview her, right? And you can't, you sort of have to do your best based on the transcripts we have from Bernard, and then you make an artistic interpretation.
But Bernard needs her just as much as he needs Joe in the story, which is very unique to see that dynamic in the movie.
Yeah, one of the things that Nia and I talked a lot about, and she's really, in my opinion, the perfect person to bring that character to life, is the importance of the family structure. And if Nia were here, she would say, "Oh, let's be honest, behind every great man, there's a great woman." You know? So I'm just going to channel her now and say that she would 100% say that, and she'll back me up on Twitter or something. Yeah, she has actually said that in several Q&As. So, you know, I think that was part of her appeal, is like, let's, you know, and she said, let's show the black family as a unit that's together and is supportive and all that stuff, you know. So I think that was, I think that's profound. I think it's profound just as a, you know, portrayal of what life can be like, and the support you need to do these kind of things.
You brought up earlier the glasses that Bernard wears, and am I reading too much in the fact that I just love the idea of the spectacles that become almost like a mask, like a disguise to Bernard.
Yeah, that was dramatic invention, but he didn't.
So Bernard did not wear.
He didn't wear fake glasses, no. But I thought it was, you know, a motif that helped sort of explain some of the broader themes in the movie. I mean, obviously, you take real life doesn't lay out exactly like a movie needs to lay out for it to be satisfying. You know, half of you would have left if it was real life, you know, because real life is slow and meandering and boring. And things, you know, one of the ways I think you make this stuff more powerful is through things like the glasses that have a character, you know, arc, that they help explain the character arc. In a visual way. I mean, you also do it with music, you do it with cinematography, you know, do it with the editorial patter of the movie. There's a lot of tools you have as a director to do it, but as a writer, I wanted to add in those glasses and then, yeah, have that as a visual representation of his mask.
And speaking of music,
the music's incredible.
I'm sorry?
The music's incredible.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that was my next question. The fact that these are all original jazz tunes that we hear.
They are, yeah.
And, you know, your composer, H. Scott Salinas, composed brand new jazz tunes.
That's right.
Can you tell us about that and the importance of that?
Sure. So Scott is you know, a musical prodigy, in my opinion. He'd be blushing now if he were here. He has a music degree from Princeton and then Berklee School of Music for graduate degree.
You went to Princeton too.
I did, with slightly different times. No, I'll just say the same time, yeah. Maybe 6 months apart. But his first love was jazz. You know, he came up playing jazz. You know, I think he did one of his theses about jazz, whatever. So, and I've worked with him several times before. And yeah, when I pitched this project to him, he was like, "Oh, this is awesome. We're going to use jazz instrumentation inside the score, and then we'll make, you know, our own jazz songs and whatever." So, yeah, that was fun to watch, you know, because a jazz tune is not a written out piece of music the way a symphony tune is. You know, it's a framework, and then you bring in the band, and the band creates the jazz song. So we brought in a band of incredible musicians into the Capitol Records building, which was cool. That's where like Sinatra and, you know, a bunch of huge, you know, jazz stuff and just music period was done. So and we got to watch them make it live. And my 3-year-old son watched too, and he's obsessed with jazz. So.
Charlotte, your DP, uses 35 millimeter. Can you tell us about that choice? Because I just love the different look that it brings to the film. Yeah,
I mean, I think digital is getting very close now, but if you were ever going to do a movie on film, and there are some definite drawbacks to it, which I can go into if people are curious, but a daylight film that takes place in the past, that's about the best case scenario for using film, because digital has some advantages in low light and so forth, and it does give it a little sheen of like, okay, this is was something that took place in the past. But yeah, I love the look of the movie, and we worked hard to get that.
Yeah, I mean, my take on it is that it made it contemporary looking, but at the same time, it had a tinge of nostalgia about it.
Right. If you look at an old film that was made in the 50s or the 60s, the film stock wasn't as good. So you see there's more, it's also been aged and been played in movie theaters and whatever, so you'll see dirt and stuff that hasn't been cleaned up, because now we can clean that up digitally. So it's like this weird, it's like between what it would have looked like if you filmed it then, but you're using the technology from them to film it now. From then to film it now. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So, tell us about Samuel L. Jackson, who is fantastic in this. Was that always your first choice when you were developing the script? Is that who you wanted?
100%. I looked at some photographs of Joe, and he always had a cigar in his hand, and I did some research on him. He owned 2 jazz clubs that were 2 of the biggest, most important jazz clubs in LA. And his character just, spoke to me as Sam Jackson. So when I got involved in revising the script, I wrote it for him. So.
And so you wrote it for him, and how difficult was it to convince him to do this?
Well, it never happens like this, but here's how it happened. Anthony called him, because they've worked together, and said, man, if there's any movie I want to do with you, it's this one. And Sam read it in, I think, a week, which is about 52 times faster than it normally you get a movie star to read something. And then I got a call from his agent saying, Sam likes your movie, he wants to do it. So
it was like a Marvel Universe speed dial.
Well, it wasn't really from Marvel. They'd worked together years ago. So yeah, they've known each other for a while. But Anthony, and he's a producer on the film, if you guys saw, because like I said, 2009 or 10 was when we first started talking about this. But he, I told him I'm going to sit down and start working on the script, and what do you think about Sam Jackson for this? And he was like, I think you should definitely write it for him, and as soon as you have it, I'm going to call him. So it was helpful.
And tell us about casting Nicholas Hoult. I mean, it's a difficult role because he doesn't do the things we wish he'd do, but even while he does them, he remains likable to us.
And that was intentional from the writing, and it was intentional in the casting. I mean, Nick is, in real life, one of the most likable guys you could ever imagine. And I just thought it was much more interesting to, he could have been written and he could have been cast as a villain, right, who sort of turns his back on them at the end. But I think human nature is more complicated than that, and as best as we could research, it was very hard to find much detailed information about him. I don't think he was I don't think he was racist. I don't think he was trying to throw them under the bus. It seems like the congressional, committee really twisted his arm, and he was like, okay, well, I'm literally gonna, because he committed 200 crimes, and the 2 black guys committed a non-crime that they made into a crime. Misuse of banks' funds for I don't know how clear that was, but it's like they took a broker's fee, and Congress and the federal government said, well, the broker's fee was too much. So obviously you were criminals,
And he couldn't be here today, but Bernard.
All of my actors are working.
Correct. So. Yeah, but we also
in far-flung places. Yeah.
Bernard Garrett Jr., the son of the Bernard Garrett, was very much involved in that production. What was it like to have actually the family involved?
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't so much involved in the production, but the dad had said, you know, I want to convey my rights through my son, and also to David Lewis Smith, who did all the. He's a producer and story credit and co-screenplay credit, because he wrote the initial script and he did all the research, the 7-8 hours of tapes. It's 230 pages of transcript, so however many hours of tapes that is. So we tried very much to base it as best we could on the actual words of Bernard Sr., the way he described things, and then stuff that came out of the congressional testimony. His words or their words about, you know, Eunice and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. And Bernard and Joe has such a incredible dynamic. One of them is, Joe is super flashy, Bernard is reserved and driven. Was that based on reality, and was it something that you based the story on?
As best we can tell, that's kind of who they were. Yeah, you know, Bernard was stay out of the limelight. I mean, there's a picture at the end when they're getting the keys to the Banker building. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you guys remember seeing that. And like literally, I think we're pushing in on it, so it might not be obvious, but while he's getting the keys to the Banker building, Joe has a big cigar that's like lit, you know, and he's got a big grin on his face, and you know, Anthony's character Bernard is like, you know, so yeah, you're reaching back into the past, and nobody's alive anymore, so you're doing your best to feel around the edges and create characters, you know, that also work on screen.
And I told the audience that this is Apple's first theatrical release. How does it feel to you to be part of history, the first theatrical release for Apple?
Super exciting. You know, yeah, who wouldn't want to be in that position? It's hard for me to imagine a company that has, you know, more perfect odds of surviving the streaming wars than Apple. And you know, it was important to me to have a theatrical release, and it is important to most directors. You know, we're going to have a sizable window up for that, and it's super exciting. And then you know, then it goes to the platform where the access, you know, for people who can't come to a theater all around the world is incredible. So you know, tens of millions of people can watch it that way, which is great. But the people that want to see it in the theater, I'm all for that.
No, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Yeah.